I'm just looking at the screen and I see Dan there and Mary are on. And I need to tell you that Dan contacted me about making a presentation.
Working on.
And Dan has maybe some ideas of what he would like for me to talk about as an introduction.
Okay, I can do that. I almost jumped in there a minute ago and said, well, he's more than all that, Jeannie.
I'm sure.
He's a slave driver. Okay. He wants you to not only listen and pay attention and learn, but to absorb this and to become addicted to it to where you almost eat, sleep, and drink your beekeeping. And anytime he's the fellow that taught us to share all the information we got. Dana's got tons of it out there on lots of websites that he's created and just passed along to the clubs to post. And, we've dealt with some other speakers before that they don't want you to record it and share it.
Mhm.
But Dana believes in sharing. Dana believes in helping as many people stay in beekeeping as you can. And that's what I wanted him to maybe be able to instill a little bit of that in our club tonight too.
Okay. I've held a number of offices in various clubs. I was involved with getting ECOBA started way back in the mid 1990s. Was the president of Central Ohio Beekeepers and had the pleasure of knowing Dan and Mary at both of those groups. We did something in Central Ohio, and Dan, you can jump in anytime you want.
Okay.
What we did, I became a vice president of Central Ohio Beekeepers, and one thing that I noticed is, and I traveled around the state of Ohio talking to a number of clubs. And the one thing I noticed, there were a number of clubs that did not have any bee yard. And Central Ohio was fortunate because Ohio State allowed us to use their campus, and they gave COBA a chance to put up a building and bring in hives to locate on the old bee yard that Walter Rothenbuehler had. And so we invented a name somewhat to get people excited about going to the bee yard. We called it Fun in the Bee Yard. Remember that, Dan?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it met one year it met on Wednesday nights, and on another year it met on Tuesday nights. But our goal was basically to introduce beekeepers, not new beekeepers, so much as the people who had been keeping bees for a while. And we invited the new beekeepers to come along and see how things were going. So one of the things that we did is we set up some hives for the more experienced beekeepers. And then we set up some hives for new beekeepers so they could kind of see what was happening or what should be happening in their own hives. And we had a vice president by the name of John George that said to me, we should make a picnic out of this. And so John took over the role of setting up a little grill, and we had hot dogs and we had people bringing in things. And pretty soon that became really a nice feature of our club because it brought people together and they could sit and chat with each other. And every Wednesday, it was always a challenge to come up with a topic. So we depended upon members. We were fortunate to have Joe Lackshaw, for example, as a member. And these members each Wednesday night or Tuesday night came in and did something with a hive of bees. And we experimented. For example, I don't know how many of you have questions about screen bottom boards, but screen bottom boards were just kind of being introduced at that particular time. to fight Varroa. So we decided to find out. We set up 3 hives. These hives were, 3 of them had screen bottom boards and 3 had solid bottom boards. And what we did then is essentially said, okay, let's find out. Let's see how these bees go through the winter, and we'll make, you know, we're not going to make any rash statements about one being better than the other, but we found out for ourselves that there wasn't much difference at all, because the bees on the screen bottom boards did as well as the bees with the solid bottom board. As a matter of fact, I think in that particular situation, we lost 1 hive that had a screen bottom board and 1 hive with a solid bottom board. So that's what a bee yard, in my way of thinking, for a club really can answer. When people want to know what mite treatment do I use? I can tell you, I've been around bees. I was born into a commercial beekeeping family when we didn't have the mites and that sort of thing. And when somebody asked me, well, what do I use to treat for the mites, the varroa mite? And by the way, we had a tracheal mite problem. The end of the 1980s and into the 1990s, it was pretty serious. Diana Samatero at Ohio State University worked on a grease patty idea. And really what happened with the varroa mite is the tracheal mite is that eventually the bees that were susceptible to tracheal mites died, and the bees that survived became resistant more or less to the tracheal mite. It's nothing that we did really in terms of treating our hives that made the situation that way. It just happened. So we were looking at, in our bee yard, various ways to treat for mites. And I think that's still a big question with most beekeepers. What do you use to save your bees? Most bees die from varroa mites, in my opinion. It's worse than American foul brood. Other than with American foul brood, you almost have to get rid of your equipment and the bees. So those of you who are in on this Zoom meeting tonight, if you have questions about anything, I'm not an expert. I've been around bees long enough to know that I make mistakes too. And my goal is just to prevent making the same mistake twice. So if you have questions about bees and what you're seeing in your hives, I'm prepared to answer it. Now, North Carolina, just to give you a little background, I used to sell package bees, raise queens, live in Ohio, and work bees in Georgia. I would drive to Georgia every Monday morning, get down there Monday night, work bees on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. On Friday by noon, I'd be heading back to Ohio. That's a 12-hour trip, and sell my bees to customers at a barn I had over in Johnstown, Ohio. So we're thinking right now a number of things about spring here in North Carolina, and I'm sure you guys realize that we're about 4 weeks ahead of you. Our daily temperatures here today, our high was 55, and our low was like somewhere like 34. And I looked at your temperatures, and I'm seeing the low 30s and temperatures dropping down into the high teens. And so it makes a big difference in what I'm seeing right now and what you're seeing, but you'll be seeing what I'm seeing in approximately 4 weeks. We're seeing a lot of new beekeepers they've lost their hives. It's sad to say, but I think experienced beekeepers have a little advantage because you've got drawn comb. You've had a chance to experiment with whatever mite treatments you're going to use. And eventually, beekeepers, I don't know how many of you I'm talking to that are brand new. Are there any? Hello? But if you have drawn comb, and if you save, and I save some honey back. And when you talk about feeding the bees about this time of the year, I can drop a deep frame or a medium frame into a hive that is a little short of food. And as a result, I feel very good because my bee populations right now, I just was in a bee yard today. I did have 9 hives in it. I'm down to 8. So I've lost one. And it's discouraging to lose a hive, but quite frankly, here in North Carolina, we've got blogs where a lot of new beekeepers from last year are really, sad to say, very discouraged because they're thinking well, let's take one case. How many of you have seen mold on frames out of the brood where the bees have died? I see heads nodding, but they are talking about throwing that away because it's no good anymore. And I'm saying, hey, just brush the bees off, clean it up a little bit, and put it back into a hive with a strong colony of bees, and the bees will take care of that problem. They'll clean it up. And so those of you who have had bees have recognized it. And here again, we go back to the bee yard at Ohio State. We had wax moth problems. One of the buildings that they had, at Ohio State, Sue Colby had some boxes sitting in there that had wax moth in them. The wax moth had not destroyed the whole frame, so there were still some comb left on some of the frames. We put those into a strong hive, and believe it or not, the bees got rid of the wax moth and cleaned up the frames, and you would hardly even know that the frame had any wax moth damage done to it. And that's the advantage of having a bee yard or something like Fun in the Bee Yard, because you're saying, okay, we're going to put this in a hive, and 2 weeks later we take a look at it and we see the difference immediately. Do you have a club bee yard?
Yes.
Yes, you do. Okay. So if you have a club bee yard, there's a wide number of things that you can do. Now, I know that the experienced beekeepers in a club need to take charge. There's a lot of people who want to help, but they kind of sit back and wait for somebody else to do it. You need to have somebody who's willing to really step up and do the job. And by the way, I've been given a lot of credit for that bee yard over there at Ohio State, but I can tell you it wasn't done by me. The building that got built over on the bee yard was done by members of the club. The work we did in the bee yard was done by members of the club. The little picnic we had was done by members of the club. It just takes somebody who wants to take charge and overall kind of plan things so that people have something to do. Busy people are not bored.
When it comes to intelligence, there is
If you,
no place for politics.
Somebody's got a radio or TV on behind them. If you do, could you mute yourself so we can hear Dana?
I'm sorry.
I'm talking to the rest of the club, Dana. Trying to get whoever's got TV in the background to mute. There we go. Thank you.
Okay. Well, sometimes I feel like I'm talking to this screen, and I like to be face to face with people.
I know. We figured out. I figured out. I think now you can go down to share screen, and I think it will let you. I Googled it. What happens if you pop up share screen?
Well, I've got Zoom on here now. I pushed something wrong.
Yeah, now your screen is being shared actually.
Okay, so you can't see me?
But we can still see you over to the side, but if you have slides or anything you want to show us, you have to pull that up on your computer.
Okay. Well, I do have a number of slides slideshows that I can show. As
Sure.
Dan has pointed out, I developed a CD that had over 30 PowerPoint presentations that people could take a look at. And by the
Well,
way,
but-
any of those are out there, can be used by anybody at any time. And if you want a PowerPoint file,
Mhm.
so you can change it and do whatever you
Mhm.
want with it, I can send that to you.
Great. Are your things on YouTube, or are they on your website?
No, I actually sold a CD. I started it in 2001. It kind of got outdated, so it's no longer in production. But when Brushy Mountain Bee Farm went out of business, I just decided that was the time to not sell it anymore.
Yeah.
But I could send the club a copy of it. I don't know, Dan, did you get a copy?
I was going to say you did.
Send it
You
to
what?
me.
Awesome.
Yeah, you sent me the copy of it.
Yeah, okay. It was.
Awesome. Well,
That
If
and
you
a
want to
flash
share
drive
that with
too.
anybody, burn copies of it.
wonderful.
You can do that.
Dana, you want to give us the website that you have with your bee notes on it?
I'm in the process of setting up a website. Right now, I send the Monday notes out to those people who request to get on it, and it goes out by email. There's been one big improvement that I'll be making next week, and that is, so far I've been saying it CC, which includes everybody
Mhm.
listed. I'm going to restrict it down to so you can't see the other people receiving it.
Right.
That'll be called a BC send.
Yeah.
And if anybody that wants into Monday Notes, it's free. What I do basically is sit down during the middle of the week after I've done various things, and I'll write the next issue. It's usually about 5 pages long. I try to make it as current as I possibly can. And I have people getting Monday Notes from Mississippi to New York, a couple of Michigan. The group from Ohio is growing. And so I have to kind of spend a little time talking about the weather and what the temperatures are. And so I've been talking about brood nest. You guys, if you want to hear a little bit about the winter preparation, you should have done that back in October, November. But I certainly can spend a little time talking about the brood nest situation right now. And
Sure. Do you want to? Are you going to have anything to show, or should I cancel this screen share for now?
you can cancel that screen share.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. If I
So-
can figure out how.
Well, I'm looking at, on my screen, I'm looking at a big
Big zoom.
Zoom. It
Yeah,
says
that's what I'm
Zoom.
trying to. That's what I'm trying to get. You might have to stop it on your end, actually. This will stop other screen share. Do you
Let
want to?
me see what else I can find here.
I don't know why.
Well, I see Willard's on there, and
Yeah.
Tom, I can see some of the people that are on it.
There we go.
Okay, yeah, things change.
Okay. Yeah. Talk about the brood nest. That sounds great.
Okay. Since I've come to North Carolina, I'm keeping my bees in a single deep brood nest. Bees down here, the queen stops laying maybe in November, and by Christmas time, she's laying again.
Wow.
And I know up there it takes a little bit longer. Maybe late January, you'll see the queen start laying eggs, and usually she'll start laying in a small pattern. The critical thing with a brood nest is if you have a hive of bees, once that queen starts to lay, the bees will cover the brood. They'll have a nest temperature about 92 degrees. And if you've ever seen the nest as it develops, what they do is if you have honey right up to the brood, they'll start removing the honey closest to that brood.
Oh,
And once egg laying begins, what'll happen is as they empty cells around the brood nest, the queen will go to those areas and start to lay eggs. So the nest begins to grow. The biggest problem is once the nest is established, once they eat all the honey around the nest, especially in Ohio, I've seen this a number of times, you'll have honey in a hive and a hive that's dead. And I'm sure all of you have probably seen that. It's pretty important to put the food, if you're using any kind of feeding method, and I like patties. I make my own patties, and I go to the, we've got Sam's and other places around here where I can go out and buy 50 pounds of powdered sugar. I don't know whether you've walked into a restaurant, I mean, into a store like Sam's and you lay up on the counter 50 pounds of powdered sugar, they assume that you're baking. If you buy the sugar, like go in and buy 200 pounds of granulated sugar, they want to know whether I have a still or not. But the fact is, I take powdered sugar and I will take generally corn syrup. And this is the important thing to remember. If I used honey, I could. But if I use honey and I'm mixing up 50 pounds of powdered sugar, I'm going to be using it with a lot of hives of bees. If by chance any of the honey that I have has American foul brood spores in it, I'm going to spread American foul brood throughout all of my hives of bees. And I can't afford that. I don't know how many of you have had American foul brood, but if you've never had it, it is extremely contagious. You can carry it around on your hive tool. You can carry it around on your bee gloves. You can spread it by moving frames from a hive that has American foul brood into nukes. Anytime you take a frame and put it into another hive, if it has American foul brood, you just spread it. And once American foul brood is established, then other good hives, little stronger hives, will enter a hive with American foul brood and start robbing. That spreads it even further. So at the very beginning, if you're going to feed, I know I don't like corn syrup, but if you could find something that would simulate honey, corn syrup is probably the best thing you can use. And so I make up these patties. It's a messy job. I use 5-pound buckets. A 50-pound bag will probably fill about 3 5-pound buckets. But I take the sugar syrup, or not the sugar syrup, but the corn syrup. I pour it in the middle of a 5-gallon bucket, and then I have an oar, you know, you have like with a canoe, and I start stirring. At one time, I had a mixer, a big one, that I could do it with. You can get these professional dough mixers. And the goal is to make a patty. You can take a rolling pin and roll it over the dough, just like dough that you'd be putting into a pie dish or something, and roll it until none of the sugar sticks to the rolling pin. Just get it really as dry as you possibly can. I do it by hand, but I'll take some of that and make like hamburger patties and place that right in the middle of that winter nest. If you open a hive right now, your bees may be there in Ohio up into the top box. And the best place to put food for a cluster of bees in the winter cluster is right above the nest. They can only move maybe in this wet. Are you going to have 18-degree temperatures tonight?
I hope not.
Somewhere around 20, 21?
I don't know. Let's see.
well, let's look.
I checked weather.com, and it says that polar air coming down from Alaska is
There's-
going right over.
No,
you guys.
28. 28
Yeah.
tonight, it says.
28 tonight?
Yeah.
Yeah, next Friday it's going to get down to 18, it says, for me.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
Saturday.
but when you get down to
Yeah.
temperatures like that, your bees are really stressed out if they cannot get to food. And it's a real common thing to see in Ohio. It's sickening to see the outer frames having honey and the bees eat within 2-3 inches of it and starve to death, usually really strong hives. And so I put that patty right over the, and by the way, I don't put it over like a dough ball and you spread it out over top of the frames. I just use, you could use wax paper, but I use regular newspaper and put a couple slits in it. And the bees will, when you go to look at your patty, the bees actually get rid of the paper. They will eat the powdered sugar and dispose that you'll find little crumbs of paper on the bottom board. If they can carry it outside, you'll find it out in front of the hive. But to me, that's what I use here in North Carolina, and I'm using it right now. And my clusters that I've looked at are usually a weak hive is down to 3.5 frames or so, brood comb. Strong hives are 5 or 6 frames of bees in a cluster. So you've got in a 10-frame hive bees on 5 or 6 frames. You've got to remember that in real cold weather, that cluster contracts. In other words, it gets smaller. You can look at 10,000 bees in a hive, and on a warm day, they might cover all 10 frames. But you get into that winter cluster, and they may be only on 3 frames. So what the bees do is they adjust new brood to the amount of area that the bees can keep at 92 degrees. And if you see a hive that has died from starvation, what you'll see are a lot of bees head first into the cells and a few bees on the outside. And, you know, it's a sad thing just to see dead hive. I might also point out, some of you might see fewer bees than that. You might see bees between 2 frames. That is a serious situation right now because they will have a live queen if you look in it. But you've got to have food where they can get it, and they need to have that temperature that they can use to raise brood. If you don't have the temperature, you don't have a big enough cluster. Often think in terms of that cluster as kind of a heat sink. They don't heat the entire hive. You know what I mean? They just keep the cluster warm. So let me go over a few points with your winter nest that you should be observing. Bees need ventilation. The worst thing you can have is a wet interior on a hive during cold weather. It's been a comment made for years and years and years, and Langstroth in his book in 1853 emphasized ventilation. There needs to be ventilation. And you know, if you have screen bottom board, you just got to avoid air drafts going up into that hive. If you can avoid air drafts, you know, we see some bees down here in North Carolina that have swarmed. They go into a tree, they build their comb on a tree, and actually survive the winter. I've never seen that in Ohio. But if I could say ventilation, ventilation, ventilation enough, it's very important. Used to be that we had plastic inner covers. Do you remember those days? Plastic inner covers. You don't see them around much anymore. I don't know of anybody that uses them, but what would happen is that warm, moist air coming from the bees would hit that cold plastic and then form droplets that fell back on the bees like a rainforest. And that's why we don't have, you know, something like that in our beehives today. If any of you have any questions, I'd sure appreciate it.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you a couple. You had mentioned the mold earlier. When you have mold on your frames or on your wax, is that indicative of moisture in the hive?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you take a hive that has died, and this is something I think people should do, if you have a hive that has died, get it inside, don't leave it outside. Cold, moist air condenses, and the fact that bees occupied some of those cells and are stuck in those cells, you don't have to pull those bees out. Just let your comb and your hive get a little bit into dry conditions. And then in the spring of the year, you can take those frames out. They're not sticky, they're not moldy. You'll see mold. But the thing is, if you, for example, are going to repopulate that hive with a package of bees, it won't be long before those bees clean that up entirely.
Right.
And I'll tell you one more thing about winter frames of a hive that has died. They will often contain honey, capped honey. And so that's actually a bonus for a package of bees. It's, you know, it's disheartening to find a new beekeeper who doesn't have this information that tells you they just burned a bunch of stuff, you know, or either send it to the trash or put it in the garbage thing because it's no good anymore. They need to learn that the bee, it takes a lot of effort for the bees to build comb.
Yeah.
And if they throw that all away and start with foundation again, they're right back where they were starting out with beekeeping.
Yes. When the bees are in, I'm assuming the cluster can move around somewhat to where
it
the
will
honey
move
is.
early in the year before the queen starts laying eggs. Once she starts laying eggs, the bees, you know, if you set a hive on fire, like they've got American foul brood, it's amazing to see the bees not escaping. They'll go back and fly into the fire and stay right there where the hive is and get burned up.
Oh. So when they've starved, but there's still honey in the hive,
right?
Is it because the cluster has gotten so small they can't move enough to get to the honey that's there, or what?
I've seen big hives with a lot of bees that have eaten all the food around the cluster die because they may be just 2 inches away from surviving, and they just don't move. They can't. If it's earlier in the fall, they can move that cluster around where the food is, but once they start egg laying, they don't move it.
Okay, that's good to know.
Dry, sheltered hives. When we had our bee yard at Ohio State, another thing we did is we took straw bales and set them up as windbreaks by our hives. And so for the winter, rather than facing wind chill factors and drafts, putting an entrance reducer on a hive doesn't keep the cold out, but it does reduce the drafts. And with screen bottom boards, the thing I discovered basically is when the bees build that winter cluster, they fill the spaces between frames with bees, and they keep that cluster warm, and drafts and cold air don't go up through the spaces between the frames. The bees fill that whole area just like a basketball. The bees in the center will put their heads into cells. The bees between the frames will cluster, and they conserve the heat that they produce. Okay.
You
Okay.
had talked about using corn syrup, and I know we've seen different sites that'll say not to do that. Why
Right.
corn syrup instead of water with the
Water will make the sugar hard.
okay.
Okay. There are a number of formulas, by the way, in which you can heat heat sugar water and make a candy board, what they call a candy board.
Right.
But generally speaking, bees prefer something that is soft rather than something really hard.
Mhm.
Maybe you've put a poorly mixed batch of sugar syrup onto your hive, and you'll notice if you use a top feeder, how it hardens and gets
Right,
really
crystal.
hard, and the bees don't ever use it.
Right. Right.
So if that helps you any, as a commercial beekeeper, by the way, in at one time, Dan Grant, who's over in Circleville, had White Star Farms. He and I would go in and buy a tanker of corn syrup. I mean, that's a semi truck hauling,
Wow.
and I got 50 drums of corn syrup. And I'm going to tell you, that's the easiest way to feed bees, as I can tell you. And I never saw any difference or any, bad effect on my bees.
Mhm.
And when you talk about feeding corn syrup from a 50-gallon drum that sits on your truck with a pump, and you've got like a gas hose going out that you can just, we used the division board feeders. Those are the feeders that fit up against the side of the wall. You can just take your hose and go out there and slide the top cover over just a little bit. And by the way, telescoping top covers are not used too much by commercial beekeepers.
Car,
But
to
we could just
ACC
fill
by
up with
8:30.
corn syrup and it worked fine.
Half hour to get up there, maybe.
Hey, Linda, you need to mute.
How early? Sorry.
Okay. So I do appreciate your comment about corn syrup. It has a reputation in the past of being overheated, and beekeepers that got corn syrup that was overheated did have problems.
Okay. Somebody wanted to know why powdered sugar and not granulated.
Very easy to explain. Granulated sugar is a crystal. You put it with water and it will then recrystallize. Powdered sugar has corn syrup in it, or not corn syrup, but baking soda.
Right.
There's a powder
Cornstarch.
that keeps it from
cornstarch. Yeah.
cornstarch that keeps it from
Getting
getting sticky
No, it's okay.
or hard. And so about 5% of your powdered sugar is going to be that additive that keeps it from clumping up.
Okay. And that
That's a good question, by
doesn't
the
hurt
way.
the bees, in your opinion, right?
I'm sorry?
That does not hurt the bees that you found?
No, doesn't affect them one iota.
Now that I think about it, we have had people tell us that they use marshmallows to
Yes.
mix, and marshmallows are made with corn syrup. So I guess
Yeah.
that's
Well,
same thing.
I know that your commercial beekeepers today will go to Cargill and get a tanker full of corn syrup rather than spend all that time mixing up sugar, granulated sugar. I can remember the days when I had a cement mixer that I used to mix my sugar water, sugar syrup. And that's a long time consuming prospect if you have very many bees.
Yep, it is.
And there's one other point about winter that I think I should point out to you. Bees are just like any other pet that you have. You don't worry about spending food for your dog or your cat.
Mm-hmm.
You don't worry about taking your dog, for example, to get its teeth cleaned. Vets are expensive. I have a friend here in North Carolina that had a horse that had big problems. They spent a small fortune to keep that horse alive. And here's a hive of bees. Maybe you only have one or two. goodness, you certainly can spend some money to make sure they survive.
What is
Okay.
the use, at what point do you add pollen to the patties?
For a hive that has existed for some time, the bees will store pollen in the comb. So you
Right.
don't really need to worry too much. Oftentimes, the bees will put a little layer of honey over pollen, cap it over, and then when they need it, they have access to it.
Mhm.
Right now, our bees here in North Carolina are bringing in pollen.
Wow.
We have cherries in bloom down here.
Mm.
In my neighborhood, we drove by a beautiful pink tree just all blossomed out. And we oftentimes ask ourselves, what are the bees bringing in? You know, you don't know. There are some beekeepers that like to feed dry pollen. They'll take a 5-gallon bucket and pour some pollen in it. Or you can take during the day, just take a pan or something, put some pollen in it. I've seen bees working on trees that have been cut down where they get the sap that's coming up out of the tree. I've seen them in barnyards where they're farmers complaining because the bees are in the feed trough and the animals can't eat.
Right.
Bees will go out there and get this stuff and bring it back to their hive. You have no idea what they're bringing back.
Right. But you don't add pollen to your patties is what I'm,
I don't.
okay.
I could easily.
Yeah.
But I really don't think a hive that's bringing in pollen needs a pollen
Right.
patty.
Right. Right. Well, and isn't there a reason in the wintertime not to add pollen to the patties? Doesn't it encourage the queen to lay or something when you don't want her to lay? Or
Well, let me touch that subject because
Yeah.
that's an entirely, a critical subject.
Yep.
I feed the daylights out of my bees, which results in big clusters of bees. They take a lot of food. I get into February and that's swarming season down here.
Yeah.
In your area, it's going to be March, April. But
Mm.
anytime you stimulate the bees with additional food, and we call that pushing them, you're going to have to deal with swarming. There's no question about anytime you add more food to a hive and they are using it, they're going to produce brood and more brood and more brood and more brood and bees. And for those of us, and for me, when I was in a commercial business, that meant bees I could sell in packages. There's that old saying, your bees go to the trees. Well, you make money from the bees by selling them. And a person can start making splits. If there's anybody there in Ohio that's selling nukes, it pays to feed your bees, make splits, and for the person who is not selling bees, an interesting question came up here in North Carolina just the other day from a person that reads my Monday notes. I had a piece of paper here just a little while ago, but the question really was, and I would love to read the question in its entirety, but somehow I've mislaid it. But it's something to the effect of, what happens if you have a hive that's really strong and you don't want it to swarm? What can you do? Well, add more supers and hope that hive's going to collect a lot of honey for you. You have to do swarm control, but stop the feeding. That's one thing a person needs to do. If you've got a hive that's, about to swarm and you've got food coming into the hive, don't keep feeding them. There's no way to stop a swarm, as far as I know, once they've started building queen cells. Because you can go through and cut down all the queen cells, but they will make new ones.
While you're pausing, people are asking for the how to sign up. I know we have this information, but I can't find it. How to sign up for your bee notes?
It goes to my email address, which is Stallman, Stallman, Apries, APIARIES at AOL.com. It's all lowercase letters. Just Stallman Apries at AOL.com. You could publish that in your newsletter if you want, but there is no charge for it. Anybody that wants to join it. I've grown from probably about 25 people from the original mailing list I had January the 1st to right now about 110 people. And it always comes out usually on Sunday. This week I sent it out on Saturday night, but I'm working on the issue that'll come out Sunday. You know, I've got it pretty well, got some ideas, and then I have a draft, and then my wife goes over the draft, correct my spelling and all that kind of stuff. And then once I feel comfortable with it, then I send it out. And I've got some questions people ask me that I oftentimes try to address in my Monday notes, because no matter whether you live in Ohio or whether you live in North Carolina, it's just a matter of timing. The leaves here have not, you know, come out yet, but we've got little buds on our maple trees that as soon as we get any kind of warm weather down here, those things will burst out and the bees will go crazy on maple. That's a great willow, maple, all those plants and trees provide a great amount of food for bees real early in the spring.
Great. Anybody have any pressing questions before he?
Well,
thinks
I've
of
got
something else he
another
wants to tell
statement
us?
I'd like to add too.
Great, please.
You need to look ahead. If you're a beekeeper, especially if you've got hives right now, you need to be thinking, you know, what am I going to be, where are the bees going to be 2-3 weeks from now? And once you have any number of hives, and I don't know how many of you out there have 10, 15, 20, but boy, I'm going to tell you, if you procrastinate and you don't do anything right now about equipment needs or anything like that, once you get to the point where the bees are really drawing out foundation, bringing in dandelion pollen and all that kind of stuff, apple blossoms, once you reach that point, you can't keep up with them. So if you really want to know what did I do yesterday and today, I've been working on belting equipment. And it's we had a 54, 55 degree day today, but we had a lot of wind and the bees were flying a little bit, but not like they normally do when the temperature's around 55. But boy, I'll tell you, it was nice working belting equipment. I can remember in Ohio when I had a barn in Johnstown, Ohio. That was where my business was located. I was dressed in my coveralls and jacket and insulated boots and, you know, just envying those guys south that could paint their equipment. But it'll come.
Yep.
And let's see. Is there anybody out there that really is becoming a new beekeeper?
Looking here. We have a few that are maybe in their second year.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Well,
we
the one
had
thing- Right.
COVID hit right after we got our bee class in, and then we
Mm-hmm.
couldn't really support our new beekeepers very well last year. So
Right. The one thing I try to tell new beekeepers, it's amazing to me of all the things that are available online to new beekeepers, and the new beekeepers are totally lost when it comes to not having a bee school
yes.
and following what they find on the internet. Several people are now, of course, we've had the top bar hive for quite a while, and there are people keeping bees in top bar hives quite successfully. We've got people now working with long hives. there is nothing new about top bar hives or long hives, nothing new at all. But some of these people are paying a pretty good price for some of the equipment that they're buying. And I just hate to see people who spend as much money as they do fail. It just almost, without a bee school and a mentor, it's real tough to survive. So any of your members that are looking in, I would suggest, as Dan has done in the past, I would suggest that finding a new beekeeper who needs a mentor, to try to work with them. All of us have, a way we do our bees. That old joke with people about you talk to 10 beekeepers and you'll get a dozen different answers on how to take care of your bees. Well, quite frankly, if you've kept bees, you find what works for you. There is no really one way to keep bees. There are many ways to do it. Success comes with time. Once you become aware that the bees are, they're under a lot of stress. I gave a bee talk, just a month ago to beekeepers in Georgia about stress, the amount of stress that a hive of bees faces. Here we are, taking a colony of bees, feeding it enormous amount of food, then we start splitting it, and some people let the new split raise its own queen, or we buy a new queen and put in there. Whenever you're doing something that's kind of unnatural for a normal colony of bees, you're adding stress to them. And picking them up, and commercial beekeepers picking them up, sticking them on a truck, hauling them to California. It's just imagine yourself, somebody grabbing a hold of you, throwing you on a truck, and just spending 24 hours a day on the road, going somewhere you don't know where you're going.
That is true.
Okay.
I had something I just remembered. I read earlier in the week, and this is for anyone, Dana or anyone. I don't know what I was searching for, but I found a thing in Ohio Farmer, issue 20, or the 23rd of February, 1907. Someone
I love
from
it.
East Liverpool, Ohio, asked for information concerning the feeding of bees in the winter. And the answer is, care should be taken that each colony may have from 25 to 30 pounds of honey in the hive before cold weather sets in. And it goes on to there, and September is a good time to check to see that all colonies have sufficient food to last until warm weather. The best feed at any time is frames of honey, yada, yada, yada. But, everything I hear or read says we should have 50 to 70 pounds of honey in a hive before winter. And were the bees different back then? Have we selected different traits? Were they more conservative, smaller
Anybody
clusters?
can jump in on this, by the way. I'll try to give you an answer. Bees here in the South consume far more honey in winter than bees in Ohio. Bees in Ohio are not hibernating. No bees hibernate, but they're in a winter cluster for a longer period of time. They're not raising brood for a longer period of time. Therefore, if they're not raising brood, they don't require as much food. Any hive that starts raising brood suddenly needs a lot of food. If the food is located near the cluster, the bees can get along quite well. I have read the same material. Hive of bees doesn't need any more than 30 pounds of honey through the winter. That may be true in Ohio, but it's not true down here. If you have bees with only 30 pounds of honey in a hive, we have more days the bees fly. We have a longer brood period. And by the way, that also affects queens. Some people say you should replace a queen every year. I would say if you have a queen laying heavy brood over 10-month period, you do have a queen problem maybe. But in Ohio, I don't think that's especially true.
Yeah,
Anybody else with a thought on that?
my first thought was that perhaps with more stable temperatures, they weren't flying as much in the winter. I mean, we have so many days that do warm up in the middle of winter now that maybe they're breaking cluster and flying around and they're not flying anything to bring home.
Right.
So I don't know. It just seemed interesting.
Every time a bee, by the way, every time a bee flies, it's consuming some energy that requires food.
Right.
And if they are flying a lot, like you'd have a mild winter, and you do see a lot of bee flight, I'd be concerned about the amount of food they have. But if it's a cold winter, you know, when I was in Ohio, I remember one time I was up to Jim Two's lab. He had an observation hive, and out from the entrance, that observation hive had an outside entrance, but the bees were inside the building. There was a line of bees. You could just see the flight line because they were dead on the ground, where the bees got into that cold air. They hit the cold air and suddenly they were down on the ground. Sometimes you run into problems like that. And if you have bees and you see a lot of bees on the ground in front of the hive, usually on snow, that's not a healthy situation for your bees, because if you have insulation around your hive, that warm air usually doesn't hit the bees as quickly as it would on a nice sunny day. Have any of you observed that?
Are you meaning that when they don't realize it's warm because the insulation is keeping the cold air kind of around them?
Well, usually it's just the opposite. If you have a hive that has insulation on it and you have part of the day come out warm, the bees don't react to that warm temperature as much as they would if the sun coming in just heated up the box. You know, you've got the front box and no insulation. It appears warm to them because the sun is heating the front of the box, but they hit that cold air.
Yeah. And then they're sorry they went out.
A.I. Root, in his autobiography, wrote about keeping his bees during the winter. And he had an octagonal building. I don't know how many of you've read much about A.I. Root, but he put a little potbelly stove in the middle of that. And the bees had access to the outside. He warmed up the building a little bit, and he noticed, rather than being beneficial, this heat being beneficial, what happened is bees thought it was warmer outside, so they started leaving the hives, and he killed a lot of bees just because he added heat to the room. And I think that's most
Does that
people.
go for the same as insulating the hives, putting insulation on the outside of the hives, and or is that still beneficial?
The insulation really is beneficial. Heavy snow, heavy deep snow is beneficial for bees in the winter up in Ohio, because they form that cluster, they get in tight with that nest that they have, and they don't consume as much food during that period of time as bees that would be active. If you have bees that are flying, especially in Ohio, where you might have maybe a couple hours that they could fly, if the inside temperature of the hive stays cooler, they're not going to be so active to go out.
Do you have any experience with the 5-frame hives?
Do I have any experience with what?
5-frame hives?
I'm having
You're talking
trouble
about
hearing.
raising your bees in nukes.
Oh,
Nuke?
no, I've survived. I've had bees in Ohio survive in 5-frame nukes, set outside. And the only thing I did with those 5-frame nukes is use tar paper to put around them. Tar paper in my way of thinking, is about all you need. If you take insulation board or something like that and put it around a hive of bees, they will oftentimes miss any warm days for quite a while, maybe 2 or 3 hours before it warms up, and then start flying.
Yeah, we had success with the 5 frames so far, and they have very, very little weight to them.
Yeah.
So
And we
are they
do,
double high,
some of them are, not all of them.
but not all? Wow.
But you can easily go out to them and check, just give it a little weight test to see if the hive does need food. And right now, those sugar patties that I'm talking about would be very beneficial if placed, above the top bars, and gives them a little additional food. By the way, heat rises. So wherever that cluster is, whatever is above that cluster, they can get to that honey. Where the honey at the side of the hive,
Right.
they just can't move in that direction.
We do put sugar on ours
Okay,
every year.
good.
I find the ones that survive in the 5 frames, just a single 5 frame.
Hmm.
For me.
Well, it would for others too. As you gain experience, you know what not to do. The key thing to me with my bees basically is don't visit them so much. You don't have to get into them every day. You don't have to find the queen every time you open the hive.
The time is
That's
now
just more stressful.
7:35. Your Wellness Center will be closing in 25. The Clark Center will be closing in 10 minutes. Thank you.
I'm going to have to turn up the volume on my computer so I can Are you still out there?
Yeah, Dana, what's your thoughts on the probiotics for the bees?
What do you mean by?
I mean, do you think it's a good thing, a bad thing? Have you had experience with them?
When you say probiotics, is that the right word?
The strong microbials. There's like 2 different suppliers that are making them.
Yeah, I have never used it. So I can't really tell you. There used to be a lot of people using terramycin with bees, and my honest feeling with terramycin is it was way overused, and that's the reason why we have so much trouble with the bacterial problems like European foul brood and American foul brood with bees, is because we just raised bees that were immune to the chemicals like terramycin. But the biotic, I try to use as little in my hives as I possibly can.
How do
How
you
many of you are trying to control some of these diseases with raising outstanding queen stock?
What do you use for mites?
I'm sorry.
What do you use for mites?
Down here, I really don't have to use too much for the mites. We use brood interruption because a lot of my hives raise a few queens and things of that sort. And if anything, what I will do is if I get a package of bees to replace bees in a hive, I will use oxalic acid spray, something like Joe Lackshaw he's written about and advocated for quite some time, to kill the varroa mite that might be on the bees in the package that you get. Kill them before, kill the varroa mites before you actually even put the bees into a hive. And the oxalic acid in broodless periods of time. I do have oxalic acid, use the drip method. I do not use any of the chemical strips.
Can you talk a little bit about selection? You said something about queen selection.
Yes, I think I can address that question. Is Nina online here with us?
No, she's not.
Okay. I raised 2 lines of queens. When I was in business, I had something called Buckeye Reb and Buckeye Bell. I don't know how many of you have heard of those
heard of them.
bees, but they are no longer in existence. Those lines have both died out. But the key thing with raising queens is you need to realize drones provide 50% of the genetic material. And so it's extremely important if you're going to have any, let's say, carryover from one generation to the other generation, you need to be more concerned about your drone population than you do finding an outstanding queen that's really gentle and bringing in a lot of honey. You know, boy, this is a great queen. If you take away and introduce, let's say, drones from someplace else, they're not, you know, they're mutts or whatever, your bees will revert. Her daughters will revert and not carry all those positive genetic material. So the drones, if you can raise drones from that outstanding queen and populate a mating yard with those kinds of drones, you're going to have more uniformity in the daughters that are raised. So to me, the drone mother is more important than grafting a lot of eggs from a queen that is really outstanding. If you can combine both of them together, you've really got a winning formula. But how do you find what is a really good queen? I've been lucky in my career to find a couple really nice queens, but you know what? They die after 3 years. I mean, if you can hang on to one for 3 years, that's pretty much the outside of what you've got with that particular queen. And if you try to use that queen's sons in your breeding yard, then you're inbreeding and you got another problem. So you've got to continuously make sure that you are taking advantage of diversity in your mating. And a person that's producing good queens has to always be concerned that the next generation coming on, what is it going to be like and what can you put in? Sue Colby, when she was at Ohio State, taught when you put something into a line, something else comes out. You have only so many chromosomes and so forth, you know, that make up a honeybee. And the drone carries 16 of those. So continuously raising queens and producing good queens, it's difficult to keep a line going.
Yeah, I was going to ask, when you had a line, say the Buckeye Bell, how many sets of genetic material did you have to use to continually breed with them without developing inbreeding depression or anything? Or is that a concern?
I used 70 hives for drone hives. I brought in, for example, other stock such as Marlis Bavic's Minnesota hygienic line. And you try to bring in some of those bees because when a queen mates, she may mate with 20 drones. And if you can have that diversity within, you know, that mating situation, you're going to have some queens that may fail, And by the way, when I sold queens, I had a guarantee on my queens. If you had a queen that didn't, if she was a poor layer, I replaced her. If you got one that was mean, you had to go find her, but I would replace her. The problem with selling queens is it's hard to satisfy 100% of the people who buy them. And if you really want to sell something, it's best to stand behind your product. I was fortunate because I gave a lot of talks in Ohio and went around to bee clubs, and I never really had to advertise. But the fact is, your customers tell you what kind of queens you've got. You can brag about them, do whatever you want to. I just got one little story to tell you guys. I think of this every time I see one of these flow hives or something that people buy. At some point in the 1990s, there's something, I went to a American Beekeeping Federation meeting, and I listened to a guy do a sales talk on the Israeli hive stand. Have any of you ever seen an Israeli hive stand? This is a hive stand that is made out of tubular steel. It's designed so you can set, it has a rim on the top, so you can set honey supers on top. And the brood chamber is on like a little shelf, a drawer, like you pull out and can examine the brood without taking the supers off the top. And I thought, boy, that sounds like a really good idea. The hive stand held 4 hives, colonies, but you need a forklift to move them around. If you don't know what steel weighs, try to imagine 4 hives of bees and 2 guys trying to lift it. There's just no way. And what I did find out with that Israeli hive stand is that the bolts and things, and by the way, the hive slid out on a kind of a sliding kind of arrangement, had rollers and things with a little track that came out. After a year, after they had been exposed to the weather, they started rusting up. And you need to have lubrication. You had to go out there and grease the rails and all that kind of stuff in order to use the thing. It was just a pain in the rear. I thought it was a pretty good idea, but I spent $300 for one, and Carlton Simpson in Danville was selling them. And in fact, I went to Tennessee and picked up 4 of them for him, and one of them was mine, and brought him back to him. Of course, I went to Georgia at that time every week, so going to Tennessee and then up to Columbus wasn't any problem. But I didn't have any help to load those damn things on the trailer. And what I ended up doing is putting one up, and I don't know how many of you have tried to load something that's like a picnic table onto a trailer or something. Okay, you have to set this thing on its end, back the trailer up to it, and then swing it over on so the 2 legs are up on the trailer, and then you pick up the other end and shove it on. And I had 4 of those things to load all by myself. And I almost gave up on the job, but I got it done. But it sure told me that these are not something, if you don't have a skid loader to move them, it's not something you want to have. For the stationary beekeeper, it would have worked fine, except the rust problem. It just, mine, I hauled off to the junkyard because it was taking up room and it wasn't of any use. And I just thought $300 down the drain, there it is. So experience, we all have to try new things. I mean, I'm not against trying new things, but I've come to this conclusion: let other people do it first.
Yep.
If somebody wants a flow hive, do it first. I'll wait to see what the results are. And the results I've seen since it's come out is there are some people that advocate it. There are some people who have faced the fact that there are strict limitations with it. So I've seen a couple of them for sale somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 used. I'm not going to go out and buy anything like that for $500. Okay. Do you have bee blogs down there?
Do we have, say it again?
Bee blogs where
Bee blogs.
people ask questions and answers are given to them?
On a live, I don't know whether we
Usually on
really
Facebook.
do or not. Ohio State Beekeepers, Dana, has started some new things, and more are coming out. We're doing webinars twice a month
Right.
with speakers, and they're doing roundtables with clubs that quarterly that can come and ask questions, and it's kind of more focused on how to run things in your club, or what, how to keep your club going in COVID and that kind of thing.
I'm scheduled for one of their webinars on February the 14th, I think.
Right. And then they're going to start a radio podcast where, it's just going to be the voices, and people can call in and ask questions and things like that. So I don't know. Does anybody know? I mean, of course, we use Facebook like that. I mean, even our club website, people, post something and say, what do I do about this? And 4 or 5 members will answer, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we have a lot of that. And those are very helpful to me because I see what people are thinking. With your new beekeepers, they are getting sometimes a lot of bad information. And I don't know how you prevent that. But the fact is, bee schools, I think, are essential. And if you have a bee school, using a Zoom meeting would be a great way to teach the bee school.
Yep.
I have some presentations I've done for Wake County. Wake County is where Raleigh is located. And then we have a 5-county beekeepers association that has their bee school on Zoom. Wake County has about 80 students on Zoom.
Wow.
As we're talking now.
That's wonderful.
They go for, I think it's 4 Saturdays. And it adds a lot of income. If you're looking at club income, a bee school can really help you greatly.
Yes. Ohio State Beekeepers is also sponsoring the technology part and putting together what we're calling it is virtual mentoring. So that it's kind of intended to be a supplement to bee school, where once a month for 2.5 hours on a Saturday morning, they're going to talk about topics just for what would be coming up in your bee life that next month. So in February, they're going to talk about bee anatomy and knowing about understanding bees, and then what equipment you need and how to buy it and where to get it. And then the next month it'll be building and setting, choosing your location, things like that. And that's, being pushed out too as another income for bee clubs.
Right.
So, but there are a lot of clubs we're finding still in Ohio that don't have people that have enough technology to push those kinds of things. And there are clubs around Ohio that haven't met since last February. And they're really struggling. So, we're working on it, but
well,
it's a tough time.
I would like to become a member of your club and a paid member.
Well, that would be wonderful. Well, and I'll tell you, here's the other frustration we have. I see on here tonight, there's probably only 3 of our new beekeepers on here. And we have a membership of 160 people, and we have 24 people tonight. Yeah. And that's, it's hard to get people to engage.
And I can understand, because in Central Ohio, I always figured, even though we carry maybe 500 people on our rolls, actually at least a third of that membership didn't exist, because they would take the bee school, they would pay their first year. Well, the first year's membership was taken out of the fees. And the next year they were just gone.
Yeah.
They didn't return.
And so
So-
that's, it's frustrating when you have new people that aren't taking advantage of the education. And, I heard a talk last night, a gal up in the Akron area, and she's a former bee inspector. And she talked a lot about, they were talking about beekeeping in the city. And it was interesting. She said, if you look at when she's trying to help people defend against complaints from their neighbors,
Mhm.
she said, if you look at that list from Ohio State Beekeepers, that's the good management practices. As a beekeeper, those are your rules for taking care of your animals. And
Right.
if you can't say that you followed all those rules, then you can't really defend yourself for a nuisance complaint.
Correct. Yeah.
And I thought that was a good way to put it, that we really need to know what we're doing.
I'm going to share another story with you guys. There, in 1995, the EAS met in Worcester, Ohio.
Mm.
And there was a beekeeper. Her first name was Paul. He was from Texas. I can't remember. He's written several things. He was one of the chief apiary inspectors for the state of Texas.
Mhm.
And he told this story about a guy that had a neighbor that was always complaining about his bees. And so Paul got a phone call. Paul was an inspector, got a phone call to investigate this guy that had bees and to check to see whether he was registered or not. And so Paul went to the guy's house. Of course, he checked and found out that he wasn't registered as a beekeeper. So Paul went to his house to check, as nicest way he could about this guy that had bees in his yard and had a neighbor that was going ballistic. And so Paul went up, knocked on the door, and the guy came to the door and he says, I noticed you've got some beehives out there in your backyard. He says, yeah. He says, you want to take a look at them? And so Paul went out to the bee yard with this guy. And of course, he does this big thing of lighting his smoker and putting on his bee veil and everything. And Paul goes out to the bee yard to take a look at the bees. There were no frames in any of the hives. They were empty shells. And he said, I'll tell you, I know exactly why you're here. He says, that SOB next door goes ballistic every time. And when I see him out in his backyard mowing or doing something, he says, I light up my smoker, put on my bee veil. I go out there and play like I'm working the bees. He says, is there anything in the law that says I can't do that? And, if you have a neighbor like that, I don't recommend that your person go out there and create that hostility that would exist between the two of them. But that is something that Paul really ran into one time. And I was in Gehenna, and Gehenna was thinking of outlawing bees in the city of Gehenna. And I went to one of the council meetings and was asked by some local beekeepers to make a presentation, and literally invited several council members to come to my bee yard. I lived outside of the city of Gehenna, so I didn't have anything to worry about. But I sat and talked to them. I says, there's nothing stopping my bees from going into Gehenna. There is nothing at all that would prevent my bees from, flying across the street. And I said, you've got people that have apple trees and all kinds of things growing. And you've got to think that the bees provide you with pollination, free pollination. And here you are trying to get rid of them. They said, well, we get a lot of complaints from people who get stung by bees. And if they have a neighbor that has bees, of course, that person's responsible for it.
Right.
I said, you can literally do, and by the way, I was involved in Ohio State Beekeepers at that time and worked with the city of Cleveland that allows everybody to have 2 hives of bees and follow that guideline that you're talking about. And Gehenna, they decided that it's reasonable for a person with a small lot to have 2 hives of bees. And that the best way to handle this would be to work with neighbors, for the beekeeper to share with them. You know, some people have this attitude, it's my house, my castle, I can do anything I want to do. But share a little honey with your neighbors and just talk with them. And you know, if you have, in those days, we had VCR cassettes with things about bees, just drop something like off at their house and let them look at educational material. And generally that was up to the bee inspectors to do rather than the zoning board or anybody else. But once they knew that that was something that we as Ohio State Beekeepers was working on, they thought, okay, it sounds reasonable. You know, we're reasonable people, and I appreciate that. Most of your people in town respond to complaints. They get a complaint and they get a complaint, and they get a complaint. That beekeeper just needs to realize that they need to keep their bees responsibly.
Yep, absolutely.
So I've got several PowerPoints that I could, you know, I could put online with you, the Zoom meeting, and talk about them. Dan's got a collection of probably about 30 PowerPoints you could put on and have a meeting of your own, and have somebody narrate, you know, look at as a matter of fact, they could look at the PowerPoints and use any pictures, anything, and make it your own. Which,
well, we can do that. We just
yeah.
enjoy hearing from, you know, some of y'all,
And Ohio State's
beekeepers from all
right.
over. And
you've got some excellent materials put out by John Grafton and Jim too.
mm-hmm.
That's available to beekeepers. Those things really work out as good educational things. Mm-hmm. But going back to Dan, I really do appreciate people like Dan, and I don't know you, but it's nice meeting you, and people who give of their time. You don't get paid for doing your jobs, but the fact is, those people who are online tonight are contributing, and they are going to be, in my way of thinking, creating that atmosphere that COBA had in their bee yard. And I don't know, I hear that COBA still has some bee yard activities going on. Mm-hmm. I have no idea, you know, how it's gone since I've left. It was, I was the president of COBA in 2011, and up to that particular point. And then my wife died in 2012, and my life changed considerably after that.
Right, right.
So I wish all of you guys well. I don't know when your meeting's going to come to an end, but somebody told me one time, I said, Dana, you just don't ever shut up.
Oh, you're fine. Does anybody have any questions for Dana before he finishes up?
Don't have a question, got a statement.
This is
there you go. I was going to say, Will.
Will's the new president of COBA.
Okay, very good.
Go for it, Will.
I've communicated with Will online a little bit.
Yes, you have. Yeah, I appreciate that.
And yeah, and anytime you need any help or anything, I'm still a Buckeye. I might be down here in North Carolina. I've got, I used to have a friend in Georgia who would call me, his name was Billy Engel. And Billy and I had a business together, and he would talk about the weather in Georgia, and I was up there in Ohio, and I'm thinking, oh my God, don't tell me that stuff, Billy. You know, he's out there working bees, and I'm still freezing. So, but I'm still a beekeeper at heart and trying to do what I can do. This bee note that I'm doing is more for my own sanity than anything else. I'm not trying to convert people to any one particular way of keeping bees, but just make some observations on what's happening. And I have been doing this for 3 years. Up until January, it was called Monday Notes. And we've got quite a few people here in North Carolina that follow it. But
It's a great way to pass on the education to the next generation of us beekeepers. So,
Yeah.
But Will, did you have something you want to say? Will Merrill?
I want to give Dana an update on the Coba bee yard.
I'm interested.
You're cutting in and out, Will. I don't know why.
Can you hear me?
Now and then.
Try that again.
Okay, you said something about the Coba bee yard. I'm interested.
Again.
Yeah, your face and your voice is freezing up.
Will, stop your video so you don't use as much bandwidth and try just audio.
Hang on a minute. Wait a minute. Okay. I've got my speaker on, my microphone on. Can you hear?
I can hear you.
But you keep cutting out. Turn your video off.
Right.
Screen off.
It's alive and well, and we actually receive
Can't hear you. The last thing we heard you say was we actually received. Nope, you're frozen, Will. Turn your video off and just use the mic.
Say again?
Turn your video off and just use the microphone part.
I didn't understand.
Turn your video off.
Okay. Okay, hang on a minute. This thing's not cooperating. Here we go. Okay. Wait a minute.
Okay, now try to talk without. Nope. Now it's back on again. There you go. Try
Can
to
you hear,
talk with.
can you hear me
Yes.
now? Can you,
Yes.
my was off. Hang on a minute here. Try something else.
Just try talking. It's not
Yes,
your
I can.
computer. It's your bandwidth on your internet. We're not hearing you at all. Well, I'm sorry. but
Well,
Will is getting things going again at Coba. They didn't have somebody that was very tech savvy at first and didn't do a lot when COVID hit at first, but started joining us for videos and stuff, and
Mhm.
and Will's getting things going again.
well, I'm so happy. If anything I can do for your club, just let me know. Okay.
Well, we'd appreciate it a lot. Anybody else have questions before we wrap up the evening? And Dana, you said you'll be on the webinar for OSW or Ohio State Beekeepers when? In February?
Scheduled for February. Let me look at my calendar.
What, it's the second or fourth?
February the 14th.
Okay.
It's a Sunday.
Yeah. February 14th on the Ohio State webinar. Okay.
You're the Valentine's Day speaker.
Oh, right. Okay.
But
Righty.
I'll be doing stresses on bees and that sort of thing.
Okay. Great.
And I was delighted to be invited to make a presentation. I know most of the officers of OSBA, and
Right.
I look at so many new people. It's been practically 8 years since I've
Mhm.
really been involved with OSBA.
Right.
But
right.
I'm so happy to see everything coming together because
Well, your people that you've mentored are now, leading us. So Nina, by the way, for those of you that are still here, Nina has offered to do like 10 people at a time in her bee yard on queen rearing this summer. She does queen rearing a little differently at a different age than some of us were taught by Dwight and Zale. So she's going to set that up for us. So that'll be good. But one of the people that you taught, Dana. So
765113.
okay, Will, we can hear you now. You want to try it?
The new technology that we have, it's just a matter of us. I made the comment here in North Carolina with their bee school. It's funny. I have trouble with technology. I'm in the process of learning, but I go out and I buy a bee box just like my grandpa had 100 years ago,
Yes, it hasn't been improved on much, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So, well, we appreciate you being here with us tonight and, filling us with the knowledge that you have and we always learn
Well,
something. So
I'm the one that should be blessed. I'm going to tell you, because I have to really say a lot about Dan and Mary, because a lot of the success we had was based upon those individuals who volunteered, who,
okay, great. Thank you.
as a president, you well know you can't do all of it yourself.
that's right.
Yeah.
They do a lot for us too. So
yeah.
Yep. So we've only been around for 2 years, Dana, and there were people not happy with us. We're in Lancaster, a little southeast of Columbus, and they were not happy with us when we decided to try to start a club in Lancaster, because the Ecoba Club wanted to be able to serve all 5 counties around them, and
right.
We had 75 people come in a predicted snowstorm to the first information meeting. So.
Well, let me tell you that we've got a group here in North Carolina called 5 County Beekeepers. It's really hard to hold a club together that's got 5 counties in it.
Yes, it is.
Really difficult. You got 5 county fairs, you've got all this going on. And I think what you've done is, admirable. With the leadership that you have, it looks to me like you guys have a long future ahead of you.
Well, we hope so. There definitely were enough beekeepers in Lancaster in Fairfield County to fill a club up. So we're having a good time, but we sure would like to get together in person.
Right. Well, my son lives in Westerville, Ohio. When this COVID thing is over with, I'd be happy to attend one of your meetings. I don't want to be the speaker. I just like to come in and visit and see what's going on. And, I think at 82, my days of being a leader of any kind is pretty much self-serving. I want to sit back and watch you guys work.
You got all that information in your head, though. Let the young people do all the physical work, and us older people can.
That's the idea.
And just talk, right, Dan? Yeah, boy. So, all righty then. Well, thank you so much for coming. And unless anybody's got questions, Dan, do you have any closing thoughts tonight?
No, I don't think. I want to thank Dana for doing this for us.
Good to see
Absolutely.
Yeah, and opening up this newsletter thing that he's putting out to us also. And most of the time, Dana, whatever I'm telling the Bee Club members is just a recording of what you taught us.
Yeah.
No, I don't know that you got the last newsletter. Did you read the little poem at the bottom that I copied out of a 1872 5th grade reader?
Oh, I'll have to look at that. Oh, that's fun.
It's you can present a person with all kinds of ideas and so forth, but in the end, it always ends up being you. You are who you are.
Yeah.
Not what I did anything. You make yourself.
Right.
And I like to look at, I have a collection of old bee books, and I love to go back through those old bee books. I've got a collection of, well, at one time I had a collection of over 500 books. And when I moved out of Columbus, I gave quite a bit of those to Joe Lackshaw. But I still have a collection of bee culture magazines that go back to 1900 to present. And there's themes that repeat themselves year after year after year. New beekeepers come in and they hear talks, and they'll hear the same talk 3 years from now.
Yep.
Topics just don't change that much.
You're right. You're right.
Well, listen, my blessings to you and your club. If
Thank
there's
you.
anything I can do to help you, you just let me know.
All righty. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. We enjoyed it being, at least being able to listen to each other and talk a little bit. Can't see most of your faces, so next time come a little more presentable so you can show your face.
Well, I got dressed up for you.
I know, at least from the waist up, There's Will again. Will, you want to try one more time?
Try one more time. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Just as an update, Dana, the Coba Bee Yard is alive and well. Surprisingly, though, we have received a donation of a flow hive.
Okay.
How fun.
That's great for a bee yard, for people to see what a flow hive does and that sort of thing, and work with it and see.
Yep.
I don't close my mind to them. I just realize that some fads come along, like the hula hoop, and pretty soon it's like my Israeli hive stand. It's something that I figured was more trouble than what it was worth. But same with Coba. My feelings are real strong with Coba. I was in that club, and I was sorry to see that Barry had passed. The membership has changed considerably in the past, let's say 10 years. So if there's anything I can do with your club as well, just let me know.
I'll take you up on that, Dan. I'll be in contact with you soon.
Okay.
I appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay.
All righty. Well, thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks,
And
Jeannie.
come again, and we'll see you next month, hopefully. Thanks, Dana. We appreciate it a lot.
Well, I appreciate being able to talk. This is the first meeting I've had without a PowerPoint.
Aha. Well, see, you can tell stories all night long. All right. Who's this Zoom user we see here?
Oh,
We can just barely see your face.
what is it?
There he is. There he is. All righty. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll see you next month, and hopefully we can get together. You're welcome.